The dying village, the sun over the alien village, was not warm. It was a dull red ball, casting long shadows across the cracked ground. The air felt dry, heavy, and full of dust. Even the wind seemed tired, dragging itself through the narrow paths between small clay houses. Every door was closed. Every face that peeked out looked the same, thin, pale, and hopeless. For months, no rain had come. The old water machine, the only thing that could bring water from deep underground, had been silent for years. It stood at the center of the village like a dead giant, covered in rust and broken pipes. Long ago, it had been the heart of this place, filling every home with clean water. Now, it was just a memory of better days. Alien children sat in the shade of the houses, too weak to play. Their large, bright eyes looked dull. Some had cracked lips. Others held small cups, waiting for a drink that would never come. The elders whispered in low voices, knowing that in a few more weeks, maybe days, the last of the stored water would be gone. That was when a stranger came. Eli was not an adult, not a soldier, and not a great engineer. He was a boy, a human. Boy, no more than 12 years old, who had arrived with his parents on a trading caravan. His short brown hair was messy, his clothes were dusty from the long trip, and his eyes were curious. He had never seen a place so quiet, so empty of laughter. The caravan stopped at the edge of the village, but the traders quickly realized there was little here worth trading for. The villagers had nothing, no crops, no extra goods, only tired faces and thirsty mouths. Eli's parents talked with the caravan leader, deciding they would leave by morning. But Eli was not ready to leave. That afternoon, he wandered away from the caravan and walked deeper into the village. The ground under his boots was dry and cracked. The air smelled faintly of metal and dust. He saw the great water machine for the first time, a round, towering structure with bent panels and broken wires hanging like dead vines. A wide circular opening at the top was covered in rust. An old alien man sat beside it, head bowed, holding a small wooden bowl. His skin was a faded green, his back bent. When Eli asked what happened, the man lifted his tired eyes and said, "The heart of the village is dead. Without it, we die too." Eli didn't know why, but those words stayed in his mind. He turned and saw alien children watching him from a distance. They didn't speak, but their eyes seemed to ask a silent question. "Can you help us?" That evening, the caravan camped outside the village. Traders cooked their food, laughed, and planned their next stop. Eli sat alone, poking at his small pack of belongings. Inside, he had odd little things. Bits of wire he'd like to twist into shapes. An old music player that didn't work anymore. A cracked lens from a pair of broken binoculars. To anyone else, it was junk. But to Eli, it was treasure. His parents thought he was just a dreamer. They told him not to wander too far or get involved in local problems. But Eli's mind kept going back to the children's faces. Back to the silent machine at the heart of the village. That night, long after the camp had gone quiet, Eli couldn't sleep. The red moonlight spilled into his small tent. He sat up, listening to the faint creak of the wind outside. Then he made a decision. He grabbed his pack and slipped out into the darkness. His boots crunched softly over the dry ground as he headed toward the village. The streets were empty, but the shadows of the buildings seemed to watch him. The giant water machine loomed ahead, black against the night sky. Eli knelt beside it, running his fingers over the cold metal. Up close, it looked even worse. Jagged holes in the panels, missing bolts, gears locked in place by years of dust and rust. And yet, something about it made his heart race. It wasn't just a machine, it was a puzzle, a challenge. He opened his pack and laid out his junk on the ground. Wires, screws, a small solar panel no bigger than his hand. The cracked lens, a broken toy robot. He didn't know if these pieces could save a village, but he knew one thing. No one else was trying. Somewhere behind him, a soft sound made him turn. Standing in the shadows was a girl, small, thin, with pale blue skin and dark eyes that reflected the moonlight. She wore a torn shawl, and her bare feet were dusty. "You're a human," she said quietly, her voice unsure. Eli nodded. "And you're watching me?" The girl stepped closer. "What are you doing? Trying to see if I can wake this thing?" "Up," Eli said, patting the machine. She tilted her head, frowning. "Our best builders tried. They failed. Even the city engineers gave up." "Maybe they didn't try hard enough," Eli replied. The girl looked at the scattered junk on the ground and almost laughed. But there was no real humor in it. "You think you can fix it?" With that, Eli shrugged. "It's not about what you have. It's about what you can make." She stared at him for a long moment. "If you fail, they'll hate you for giving them hope." Eli looked up at the dead machine and then back at her. "Then I better not fail." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of dry earth. Somewhere far away, a door creaked in the village. The girl stepped back into the shadows, watching him as he bent over the rusted panels and began to work. The village was dying, but for the first time in years. Something had started moving. Not the machine, not yet, but something else, hope. A crazy idea morning came slowly to the alien village, as if the sun itself had no strength left. Pale red light spread across the cracked earth, touching the roofs of the clay houses. The air already carried the heavy, dry heat that would grow stronger through the day. Eli had barely slept. He had spent the whole night poking at the rusted water machine, pulling off loose panels, peering into its dark insides. He hadn't fixed anything yet. He had made a mess, leaving tools and strange scraps of junk spread out around it. But in his mind, something was taking shape. When he stepped back to stretch his aching shoulders, he noticed the girl from last night sitting on a broken stone wall. She was still watching him. Her shawl was wrapped tightly around her, and her dark eyes seemed sharper in the daylight. "You're still here," Eli said. "I wanted to see if you gave up," she replied. "I don't give up." Eli tried to sound confident, even though his stomach growled with hunger. The girl glanced at the mess of wires, the cracked lens, the tiny solar panel, and the broken toy robot lying beside him. "This is your plan. To fix our water heart with human garbage." Eli grinned. "It's not garbage. It's potential." The girl frowned, clearly not convinced. "It's impossible. That machine was made by builders from another world. Don't even know how it worked." "Then I'll figure it out," Eli said simply. She stared at him, then finally said, "My name is Vera." "Eli," he replied, wiping his hands on his dusty pants. Vera hesitated. "If you really want to help, you should know. You have maybe a week. After that, there will be nothing left to save." Eli felt the weight of her words, but didn't let it show. "Then I'll work fast." By mid-morning, a few villagers had gathered around the machine, curious to see what the human boy was doing. Most stood with arms crossed, their expressions doubtful. Eli heard their murmurs. "Another foolish outsider. Even the city engineers failed. He'll just waste what little time we have left." Eli ignored them. He had been taking apart broken things since he was 5 years old. Radios, toys, old solar lamps. Sometimes he could fix them, sometimes not, but he always learned something. And right now, as he crawled inside the machine's dusty frame, he was learning fast. He found a cluster of gears locked together by a thick layer of rust. He scraped at them with the edge of a flat metal spoon from his pack. In another section, he discovered a coil of copper wire that had snapped in two. His fingers itched to fix it, but he knew he'd need more parts. When he climbed out, covered in dust and grime, Vera was waiting with a small jug of cloudy water. "It's all I can give," she said. Eli took a careful sip. It tasted like metal, but it was enough to cool his throat. "Thanks," he said. Then he added, "I need more wire. Strong wire. And maybe something that can hold power." Vera thought for a moment, then nodded. "Follow me." She led him through narrow alleys to a small hill outside the village. At the top was a heap of twisted scrap metal, broken furniture, cracked tools, and other forgotten junk. The smell of old dust and rust filled the air. "This is our trash pile," Vera said. "Most of it has been here for years. If you can't find what you need here, you won't find it anywhere." Eli's eyes lit up. Perfect. He climbed onto the pile, pulling apart tangled wires, tossing aside shattered glass, testing the weight of old machine parts in his hands. Every so often, he found something worth keeping, a bent but usable copper rod, a handful of metal bolts, a cracked panel with solar cells still attached. Vera watched him work, still unsure whether she was seeing a genius or a mad child. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. Eli paused, brushing dust from his hair. "Because no one else is. And because I hate seeing people give up." Vera looked away. "My father was one of the last builders to try fixing the water heart. He worked for months, and when he failed, he stopped speaking. He's not the same anymore." Eli didn't know what to say, so he just kept working. By afternoon, he had a small collection of parts tied together with a rope. The two of them carried it back to the center of the village. Some of the villagers stepped aside to let them pass. Muttering under their breath, Eli spread his findings on the ground beside the machine. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "If I can build a temporary power core, maybe I can make the old systems wake up, just enough to start pumping again." Vera crouched beside him. "Power core. Something that gives energy," Eli explained. He held up the cracked solar panel. "This will charge during the day. If I can store that power and send it into the control circuits, it might just be enough. Or it might break it forever," Vera pointed out. Eli gave her a small smile. "Yeah, but I think it's worth the risk." Hours passed. Eli sat cross-legged, twisting wires together, attaching gears to rods. Polishing the copper coil with the edge of his shirt, sweat dripped from his forehead. His hands were covered in tiny cuts, but he didn't stop. Vera began helping, holding pieces in place while he worked, fetching tools from his bag, even climbing onto the side of the machine to check connections. She was still doubtful, but she couldn't deny his focus. As the red sun dipped toward the horizon, Eli finally stepped back. "Ready for the first test?" he said, breathing hard. Vera looked at the strange creation now connected to the machine. A patchwork of wires, panels, and scraps, glowing faintly in the fading light. "Are you sure?" "No," Eli admitted. "But let's find out." He flipped a small switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, one of the machine's ancient lights flickered on. The villagers nearby gasped. The hum grew louder. But then, just as quickly, there was a sharp pop, and smoke poured from the panel. The light went out. A few villagers laughed bitterly and walked away. Vera sighed. "I told you," Eli cut her off. "No, I learned something." He crouched down, already pulling wires apart. Vera stared at him in disbelief. "You're going to try again?" "Of course," he said. "And this time, we'll get it right." That was when Vera reached into her shawl and pulled out something small, a clear crystal that seemed to catch the last light of the sunset and hold it. "This belonged to my mother," she said softly. "She said it could store energy for a lifetime if it's true. Maybe it can help." Eli took it carefully, his eyes wide. "Vera, this might actually work." Somewhere behind them, the dead machine loomed over the silent village. The wind carried the faint sound of water sloshing in the last barrels. Time was running out, and now they had one final chance. The first test the next morning began with a strange kind of tension in the alien village. The air felt heavier, not just from the dry heat, but from the whispers that passed between the villagers. Everyone had heard what happened yesterday. The human boy's strange machine that had flickered the ancient water heart to life. For just a few seconds before dying in a puff of smoke. Some thought it was proof that he was wasting time. Others, quietly, wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. Eli didn't hear the whispers. He was too busy working. His small hands moved quickly over the jumble of parts spread out on a blanket in front of the water machine. Beside him, Vera held the crystal she had given him yesterday, turning it in the light. The way it caught the sun made it look like it was glowing from within. "Are you sure about this?" she asked for the 100th time. "No," Eli said, honestly, without looking up. "But I think your crystal might be the missing piece. If it really can store energy like you said, it could keep the circuits alive long enough for the pumps to start moving again." Vera glanced nervously at the huge machine towering above them. Its rusted panels and broken pipes made it look more like an ancient statue than something that could save lives. "If it fails again, then I'll try again," Eli said firmly. By midday, he had the crystal fitted into a small metal frame he had built from scrap. He attached wires from the cracked solar panel to it, then ran more wires into the machine's open access panel. Every connection had to be tight. He knew one loose wire could kill the whole test. Vera watched closely, passing him tools when he asked. Her pale blue hands were smudged with grease now, but she didn't seem to care. She was leaning closer than yesterday, no longer standing at a distance like she had before. When Eli finished, he sat back and wiped his forehead. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "Here's the plan. The solar panel charges the crystal. The crystal gives a burst of power to the control system. If the pumps aren't completely broken, they should start pulling water up from underground." Vera bit her lip. "And if they are broken?" Eli didn't answer. The sun was high overhead when they began. Eli positioned the solar panel to catch as much light as possible. For an hour, they waited while it fed power into the crystal. The village square slowly filled with people. The old alien man who had spoken to Eli on the first day shuffled forward, leaning heavily on his cane. A few mothers stood with their children, their faces full of wary curiosity. Others hung back, arms crossed, ready to say, "I told you so," if this failed. Finally, Eli stood up. "It's ready." He motioned for Vera to stand beside him. Together, they walked to the access panel of the water machine. Eli's hands trembled slightly as he flipped the main connection switch at first. Nothing happened. Then, with a faint click, one of the long-dead indicator lights flickered on. A deep hum began to rise from inside the machine. The villagers' murmurs grew louder. Another light came on, and then another. Eli's eyes lit up. "It's working," he whispered. Vera's mouth opened in surprise as a low, grinding sound filled the air, the sound of gears moving for the first time in years. A puff of dust burst from one of the side vents. The ground beneath their feet vibrated. The hum grew into a steady roar. Somewhere deep inside, the pumps began to move. And then, a loud bang echoed through the square, and a jet of steam shot from the machine's side. The hum died instantly, replaced by the sound of metal clanging loose. The indicator lights blinked out one by one. Smoke curled from the panel where Eli had been working. The crowd's reaction was immediate. A few shook their heads and turned away. Some muttered bitterly about false hope. Vera grabbed Eli's arm. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, coughing from the smoke. "No, but the power burst was too much. The old circuits can't handle it all at once." "You mean it's impossible?" she asked quietly. Eli looked up at the machine. No, it just means I have to spread the power out. Give it smaller bursts so it doesn't overload. Vera stared at him in disbelief. You're not giving up? Not until that thing runs, he said simply. The villagers had mostly left the square now, shaking their heads as if they'd just watched a childish game. But one person stayed. The old alien man. He stepped forward, holding out something small in his wrinkled hand. Eli took it and saw it was a thin, silver tool with a strange curved end. This was mine when I was young, the man said. A precision connector might help you make smaller channels for your energy flow. Eli grinned. Thank you. Vera looked from the old man to Eli, then back at the silent water heart. She took a deep breath. If you're serious about trying again, you'll need more parts. And I know where. To find them, Eli raised an eyebrow. Where? Atia's expression turned grim. Outside the village, in the ruins of the old factory. But it's dangerous. Very dangerous. What's in there? Eli asked. Vera hesitated before answering. Machines that were left behind. They don't like intruders. Eli's grin widened, a mix of nerves and excitement. Sounds like fun. Vera shook her head. No, it sounds like a good way to get hurt. But in her heart, she already knew she would go with him. As the sun began to set, the square emptied completely. The water machine stood silent again, but this time, something had changed. For the first time in years, it had moved. The pumps had turned. The lights had come on. It had almost worked. That night, while the village slept, Eli sat beside his bag of parts, sketching in the dirt with a stick. His plan for tomorrow was clear. Go to the factory ruins, get the missing piece, and come back before anyone noticed they were gone. Because this time, there wouldn't be an almost. Next time, it would work. Working against time the night had been restless for Eli. He lay on his thin sleeping mat in the caravan tent, staring up at the faded cloth above him, listening to the low whistle of the wind as it moved across the empty land. His mind refused to settle. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the water machine's lights flicker to life, and then die. That moment haunted him, not as a failure, but as proof that the impossible could almost be done by dawn. He was already up, packing his bag. He tucked the crystals safely inside a padded cloth, gathered a coil of wire, his small multi-tool, and the silver connector the old man had given him. When he stepped out, the air was cool, but the heat was already waiting in the distance. Ready? To press down on the village by midday, Vera was waiting near the machine, her shawl wrapped tight against the morning chill. She didn't smile. We have 3 days, she said simply. Eli frowned. 3 days, for what? For the last barrels of water to run out. After that, the weak will start to die first. Then the children, then the rest. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried the weight of every word. Eli tightened the straps on his bag. Then, we have no time to waste. The path to the factory ruins stretched out beyond the village, winding through dry, cracked plains littered with chunks of old metal and stone. The sky was an endless pale orange, the sun glaring down without mercy. As they walked, Vera explained what she remembered. The factory was here before I was born. My father said it made parts for machines, like our water heart. But when the water dried up, the workers left. They abandoned everything except the drones. Drones? Eli asked, glancing at her. Vir nodded. Spider-shaped, fast, and programmed to repair anything inside the factory. They see intruders as damaged equipment. If they catch you, they fix you. Eli made a face. Sounds unpleasant. They reached the edge of the ruins by midday. The factory was a wide, squat building of dull gray metal, half buried in sand. One corner had collapsed, revealing a tangle of pipes and beams. Rust streaked the walls, and the entrance gaped open like the mouth of a dead animal. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with the smell of oil and dust. Shafts of sunlight filtered through holes in the roof, illuminating piles of scrap and long-dead machines. Somewhere deep in the shadows, a faint clicking sound echoed. Vera moved carefully, her bare feet silent on the metal floor. Eli followed, scanning the room for anything useful. He spotted a broken control panel and hurried over, prying it open with his multi-tool. Inside were several intact capacitors and a set of thin copper plates. Perfect for regulating energy flow. He stuffed them into his bag. "This is good," he whispered. They moved deeper, stepping over fallen beams and shattered glass. The clicking sound grew louder. Vera froze, holding up a hand. "Drones," she mouthed. A shadow moved across the far wall, thin legs, jointed, like a spider's, ending in sharp points that clinked against the metal floor. One drone crawled into view, its body a smooth black dome with a glowing red sensor at the front. It paused, scanning the air, then skittered away into the darkness. Eli exhaled slowly. "Creepy." "Hey, patrol in groups," Vera whispered. "We should hurry." They found the part Eli had been hoping for in a collapsed storage room. A heavy magnetic coil, still sealed in a protective casing. It was almost as big as Eli's chest and much heavier than it looked. "This is it," Eli said, kneeling beside it. "This will let the machine start without burning itself out." He worked quickly, disconnecting it from the old power rig it was attached to. But as soon as he pulled the last bolt free, a sharp alarm sounded, a high-pitched wail that echoed through the ruins. "They know we're here." Vera said urgently. From the shadows, 2 drones appeared, their legs clattering against the floor, their red sensors locked onto Eli. "Go," Vera shouted. They ran, Eli struggling under the weight of the coil. The drones skittered after them, moving with unnerving speed, their legs scraping and clanging on the metal floor. One leaped ahead, trying to cut them off. But Vera grabbed a loose pipe from the ground and swung it hard, knocking the drone sideways. Sparks burst from its body. The second drone lunged at Eli, its pointed legs stabbing toward the coil. He twisted. At the last second, and the drone slammed into the wall. They bolted through the main hall, the exit in sight. More drones clicked and whirred in the shadows. But none reached them before they burst out into the blinding sunlight. They didn't stop running until they were halfway back to the village. Eli finally collapsed onto the cracked ground, breathing hard, the coil still clutched in his arms. "You're crazy," Vera said between breaths. "Maybe," Eli panted, "but we got it." When they returned to the village, the sight of the coil drew a small crowd. Some whispered in surprise. Others shook their heads, thinking it was just another doomed attempt. Eli ignored them. He set the coil beside the water heart and knelt to work. This time, his plan was clear: connect the coil to the crystal and the capacitors. Spread the power in short bursts and wake the machine without overloading it. Vera knelt beside him, handing him tools, holding wires steady, her eyes flicking to the horizon. The sun was dipping lower, but the sky carried a strange reddish haze. "Dust storm," she said grimly. "It's coming faster than I thought." "How long?" Eli asked without looking up. "Tomorrow night at the latest. If the machine isn't running by then," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Eli tightened the last bolt on the coil. "Then we'd better be ready for the final test before the storm hits." The dying village didn't have time for mistakes anymore. The dangerous trip the next morning began with a taste of dust in the air. The wind had a strange edge to it, carrying a dry, biting sting that made the skin itch. The sky was dimmer than usual, the pale orange light of the sun dulled by a faint red haze that had crept in overnight. The storm Vera had warned about was no longer just a distant threat. It was already on its way. Eli woke early, his heart pounding with urgency. He stepped outside the small tent the caravan had lent him, squinting at the horizon. Dark lines of swirling grit twisted in the far distance, a living wall of dust crawling toward the village. Vera was waiting by the water heart, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. "It's worse than I thought," she said, her voice low. "The storm will hit by nightfall. The machine isn't running by then. The water left in the barrels will be ruined. Dust will poison it." Eli set his jaw. "Then we finish it today." She hesitated, glancing at his bag of tools and the newly installed magnetic coil. "We can't. There's still one thing missing, the primary relay. Without it, the coil won't regulate the power evenly. The machine will start for a moment, then burn out again." "Where is it?" Eli asked immediately. Vera's lips pressed into a thin line. "In the deep storage vault of the old factory. We didn't see it yesterday because it's locked in a maintenance sector below the main floor." Eli tightened the strap on his bag. "Then we go back." The villagers who overheard their plan shook their heads. "You won't make it back." Before the storm, one elder warned, better to hide indoors and accept fate than die in the ruins. Eli ignored them. Vera didn't argue either, though her hands fidgeted with the edge of her shawl. She had seen the drones yesterday. She knew going deeper meant more of them and worse. But there was no choice. The two of them set out quickly, the wind already tugging at their clothes. Each gust carried more grit than the last. The air tasted like metal by the time they reached the factory. The sky above was a bruised red-brown, and the shadows inside the ruins seemed darker than before. "This way," Vera whispered, leading him past the collapsed section into a side corridor they hadn't explored yesterday. The walls here were intact, lined with dusty storage panels and faded warning signs in alien script. At the end of the corridor was a heavy hatch set into the floor. A cracked keypad blinked faintly beside it. "The vault is below," Vera explained, "but it's still powered, which means the drones will be active here." Eli crouched beside the keypad, prying off the cover. Inside was a tangle of wires. "I can bypass this," he said. Digging out his multi-tool, the clicking started almost immediately, faint at first, then sharper. "Eli," Vera warned, "I hear them." He worked faster, stripping two wires and twisting them together. The keypad gave a short beep and the hatch unlocked with a hiss. They climbed down a narrow metal ladder into the dark. The air below was cooler, heavy with a scent of oil and something faintly chemical. Small lights along the floor flickered to life, casting a pale glow. The relay was exactly where Vera remembered resting on a pedestal in the center of a circular chamber. It was a small, compact device, shaped like a thick disc with intricate copper channels etched into its surface. Eli approached it carefully, looks intact. He lifted it, feeling its surprising weight. "This is perfect." That was when the alarm began. A sharp, mechanical wail echoed through the vault. Red lights pulsed along the walls from the shadows above. Drones dropped down, not the small maintenance kind they'd faced yesterday, but larger, heavier ones. Their bodies were armored, their legs ending in thick, blade-like tips. Sensors glowed a bright, angry red. "Run!" Vera shouted. Eli stuffed the relay into his bag and bolted for the ladder. The first drone lunged, its legs stabbing the floor where he'd been a second earlier. The impact left a deep dent in the metal. Vera swung a metal rod she'd picked up earlier, smashing it into a drone sensor. Sparks burst out, but the machine kept coming. Its movements jerky, but still fast. They reached the ladder. But one of the drones leaped high, slamming into the rungs just below them. Eli's foot slipped, and he almost fell, but Vera grabbed his wrist and pulled him up. Climbing fast, they burst through the hatch and slammed it shut. The sound of the drones scraping below echoed up for a moment, then faded. They didn't stop moving. The wind outside the factory had picked up, and the first tendrils of the storm were curling across the plains. It was like running through the breath of some giant beast, hot, dry, and choking with dust. By the time they stumbled back into the village, the air was dim and thick. People were already boarding up windows and sealing doors. Eli dropped the relay beside the water heart and immediately went to work, his hands moving with quick, practiced precision. Vera stayed close, passing tools and brushing grit away from the components. The coil, crystal, and now the relay, the machine had everything it needed. But they had only hours before the storm swallowed the village. Eli glanced up at Vera. When this starts, it has to work the first time. There won't be another chance. She met his gaze, her face pale but steady. Then we make sure it works. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the very walls of the houses. The final test was coming, and so was the storm. The dangerous trip the morning sky looked wrong. It wasn't the bright, burnt orange glow the villagers were used to. It was dim, as if a layer of dust had smeared itself across the sun. The wind had a strange weight to it, carrying tiny grains of grit that scratched the skin. Even the animals that sometimes roamed near the outskirts had vanished. Eli stood by the water heart with his hands on his hips, staring at the giant machine. The new magnetic coil sat firmly bolted in place, but he knew it wasn't enough. Without the primary relay, all the power from the coil and crystal would surge too fast and burn the circuits again. Vera arrived at a jog, her shawl whipping around her in the growing wind. She didn't waste time with greetings. The storm. "We'll be here by tonight," she said. "If we don't start the water heart before then, it won't matter what we've done so far. The dust will poison the last barrels." "Then we finish today," Eli said, already knowing it wouldn't be that easy. Vera's eyes flickered away from his. "There's still one thing missing, the primary relay. The only one left is in the deep vault of the old factory. The part is sealed in a maintenance sector underground." Eli's voice was firm. "Then we get it." Her brow furrowed. "The deep vault isn't like the upper floors we saw yesterday. Down there, the drones don't just repair things. They defend them. They're older models, but bigger and smarter." "That's fine," Eli replied with a crooked smile. "We'll be faster." The villagers who overheard shook their heads. "You'll never make it back before the storm," one of the elders warned. "Better to hide indoors than die chasing a dream." But Eli had no intention of hiding. Vera knew it too, and after a long moment, she sighed and tightened her shawl. "Let's go before I change my mind." The path back to the factory felt different than it had the day before. The sky was a strange, bruised red, the sun a dull smear behind the haze. Every gust of wind carried more grit, and it was harder to keep their eyes open by the time they reached the ruins. The storm's edge was visible, a rolling wall of red dust stretching across the horizon. Moving like some giant creature swallowing the land, they slipped into the factory through the same broken wall as before. But instead of heading toward the upper storage, Vera led Eli into a side corridor. The walls here were mostly intact, lined with dusty panels and faded hazard signs. At the far end, set into the floor, was a heavy hatch. A cracked keypad glowed weakly beside it. "The vault's down there," Vera said, her voice dropping. "Once we open it, they'll know we're..." Inside, Eli crouched over the keypad, pulling out his multi-tool. "Then I'll make it quick." The clicking started almost immediately, faint at first, then sharper, echoing through the corridor. "They're already moving," Vera whispered. "I know," Eli muttered, twisting wires together. The keypad gave a single beep, and the hatch unlocked with a hiss. The ladder leading down was narrow and cold under their hands. The air below was cooler but heavy, with a faint metallic temps. Pale floor lights flickered on, revealing a wide circular chamber. The relay sat in the center, resting on a short pedestal like a prize in a display case. It was smaller than Eli expected, a thick disk of metal and crystal, etched with delicate copper lines. "Beautiful," Eli murmured, stepping forward. Vera scanned the shadows. Beautiful things are usually the ones guarded the most. Eli lifted the relay carefully. It's lighter than it looks. A mechanical wail ripped through the chamber. Red warning lights pulsed along the walls. From the dark ceiling, 3 drones dropped down. They were larger than the ones upstairs, their bodies plated with thick armor. Each leg ended in a sharp, hooked point, and their sensors glowed an intense red. "Run," Vera shouted. They bolted for the ladder. One drone leaped, its legs stabbing into the floor where Eli had stood a second earlier. The impact left a deep dent in the metal. Another lunged at Vera, but she swung a length of metal pipe she had grabbed from the floor, smashing it into the drone's sensor. Staggered back, sparking, but didn't stop. Eli climbed first, clutching the relay tight against his chest. The third drone tried to intercept, climbing the wall with terrifying speed. Vera followed close behind, striking at its legs to slow it down. They reached the top and slammed the hatch shut, locking it just as the first drone's blade slammed into the underside, making the whole hatch shudder. Outside, the storm had grown closer. The wind now carried a low, constant roar, and the air was thick with grit. Breathing without covering their mouths burned their throats. They ran the entire way back to the village, their legs aching, their eyes stinging. Eli kept one arm around the relay, refusing to loosen his grip. By the time they stumbled into the village square, people were rushing to seal windows and doors. The air felt electric, the first full breath of the storm pushing against the walls of the houses. Eli dropped the relay beside the water heart and knelt to work. Vera joined him instantly, holding wires steady and wiping dust from the components. The relay, the coil, the crystal, now the machine had everything it needed. Eli looked up at her. "Once we start this, there's no turning back. If it fails now, the village is gone." Vera met his gaze, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Then we make sure it doesn't fail." Outside, the first gusts of the storm rattled the rooftops, and the sky turned the color of blood. The final chance was only hours away. A new beginning. The storm had left the village in ruins. Not the kind of ruins made of broken walls or collapsed roofs. Most of the homes were still standing, but the streets were buried in a thick, red-brown layer of dust. The air still carried a dry, bitter taste. Every step left a footprint in the powdery ground, and every breath reminded the villagers of how close they had come to their end. But in the middle of the square, standing tall and humming with life, the water heart poured fresh, crystal-clear water into the main reservoir. The sound of it was strange after so many years of silence, a steady rush, like a river finally remembering how to flow. Children were the first to break the shock. They ran barefoot toward the wide basin, splashing their hands in the stream, laughing with voices that hadn't known joy for far too long. Some filled small cups and drank so quickly that the water dripped down their chins. Mothers followed, tears slipping down their dust-streaked cheeks. Eli stood beside the machine, leaning against one of its newly restored panels. His clothes were torn and stained, his hands blistered and wrapped in strips of cloth. But the grin on his face refused to fade. Vera was beside him, her eyes fixed on the water like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's alive again." Eli gave a small laugh. though his voice was hoarse from hours of shouting over the storm. "Told you we'd get it running." The chief of the village, a tall alien with skin the color of faded bronze, stepped forward. His deep-set eyes moved from the water heart to the human boy standing before it. "You saved us," he said simply. Eli shook his head. "No, I just fixed a machine. You're the ones who didn't give up when it started working. You kept hope alive long enough for me to try." But the chief wasn't interested in modesty. For years, we begged outsiders for help. Engineers, traders, even smugglers. None cared enough to stay. And then? He looked at Eli with a faint smile. A boy with a bag of broken things did the impossible. Some of the villagers chuckled softly at that. Others just nodded, their eyes still wide with quiet respect. Eli reached into his pack and pulled out the cracked solar panel he had started. "With this, and some trash," he said, holding it up. That's all it took to give the machine a heartbeat again. Vera turned to him. "It wasn't trash to you, was it?" Eli shrugged. "No, I guess I've always thought broken. Things just need someone who's willing to see what they can still be." Vera's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she looked back at the children laughing by the water. "You didn't just fix the water heart, Eli. You fixed us." The next few hours were busy. The villagers worked together to clean the dust from the main storage tanks and pipes, making sure nothing could contaminate the fresh water. Eli moved from one group to another, showing them how to maintain the machine so it would never fall into ruin again. He explained how the crystal could be removed and recharged with sunlight, how the coil and relay should be cleaned, and how to recognize when the circuits needed checking. Vera followed him, translating his simpler explanations for the younger children and showing them how to wrap wires without cutting their fingers. By late afternoon, the square had turned from a place of silence to one filled with the sounds of splashing water, clinking tools, and low voices full of life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, the chief approached Eli once more. "You've done more than give us water," the chief said. "You've given us time. You've given our children a chance to grow old here." He paused, then added, "And we would like you to stay." Eli blinked. "Stay?" Vera stepped forward, her expression hopeful. "You could live here. We could use someone who knows how to make the impossible from nothing." For a moment, Eli thought about the caravan waiting for him beyond the dunes, the endless road ahead. Then he looked at the water heart, the children laughing, and Vera's eyes shining in the fading light. "I think I'd like that," he said quietly. That night, the village celebrated. They shared food from their hidden stores, sang songs under the open sky, and lit small lanterns that floated gently upward. Eli sat by the water heart, a bowl of sweet fruit in his hands, watching as Vera laughed with a group of children. When she noticed him, she walked over and sat beside him. "So human," she said with a teasing smile. "What's next? You going to fix the stars?" Eli grinned. "Maybe. But for now, I think I'll just enjoy the fact that we're not thirsty anymore." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "You didn't just give us water, Eli. You gave us tomorrow." The hum of the water heart filled the quiet spaces between their words. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of clean water and wet earth. Somewhere nearby, a child's laughter rang out, sharp and joyful. And for the first time since he had stepped into the dying village, Eli felt something warm settle in his chest. Not pride, not even relief, but the quiet, certain knowledge that he was exactly where he needed to be. The dying village was no longer dying. It was living again, and so was he.